Tienes un pasaje, o hasta los estados de son también, para que para más, ahora estamos intentando desarrollar esa temporada de todas estas actividades de gestión y en concreto, ese límite de la presencia en el club y Santiago, así que ahora del tiempo que se va a hacer, realmente una mesa de poco de esa que lo hicimos. Voy a dar ahora directamente, como ya le dije a Mike, pero recordaros que hay una posición de stories principal que es la tercera, que es el programa sobre Mike, donde tenemos un par de novedades interesantes, que hay dos películas que están en proceso de montaje, casi rematadas ya, hoy también por primera vez aquí en Santiago, con público, para no ser nada maravilloso que sale también para que comentemos y de ver otras cosas que probablemente esperen.
Mike, whenever you want. Go ahead.
I'm so glad to be here, and it's so lovely that so many people have come on such an afternoon. It's sunny out. I thought we'd all be at the beach. When I was a young person, like you, I was driven by the need to find the answers. Perhaps it was the taste of an answer, the delicious, sweet taste of an answer as it rolled off my lips. I craved this sensation like a favorite food. I wanted to feel it over and over again. What is the answer? I knew there would be an answer. But as I grow older, my taste buds have changed. I want a different kind of food. And what I long for now is not so much an answer, but a question that I could savor, a question that I could taste for a long time. Because when I answer, when I'm certain of who you are, then I already know what you're going to say. I already know all of the possibilities that you hold within your face. When I have the answers, somehow I stop seeing who you are. In other words, I'm living in the bubble of myself, of my own certainties. I think in order for us to begin together, to take the first step, have a real encounter, in order to take the first shot of my first movie, perhaps a movie of your face. If I would want to make a movie of your face, I think before I pick up the camera, I need to put down my answers, my heavy answers, and instead become this question, who are you? Which is also the question of who am I? Or who are we together in this moment, in this room? I'm finding in this new time a new great comfort in this uncertainty, in these questions. Imagine my surprise when I discovered this long, centuries-old tradition of storytelling in Japan, which is dedicated to exactly these kinds of questions. It arises out of a culture of Buddhism, which when it comes into contact with a different country, a different culture, it produces a strange hybrid. And when Buddhism arrived in Japan, it produced Zen Buddhism. And at the heart of the Zen practice are these unusual stories. They're very short stories, and they produce a kind of a curriculum, the same way that you would go to school to study history or geography or language. So in Zen, one studies a curriculum of these short stories called koans. Students work through these stories in sequence, one after another. But sometimes, in fact, what often happens, the teacher would give you a koan, and maybe each person in the class would have a different koan they're working on. And you might spend a week or a month or the rest of your life. You might spend the rest of your life working on this story. So I'd like to share with you this the short story. It's the koan, or it's the story that I'm working on. Please don't tell me the answer, because I need it to remain unresolved somehow. And it goes like this. Wu Zhu Faiyan is just a name. Maybe I could use another name. Maybe we'll use the name of Ella. So Ella said, it is like a water buffalo, which is an ox. It is like an ox that passes through a window. Its head, the horns, and the four legs all pass through. Why can't the tail pass through? I'll just repeat the story one more time. Ella said, it's like a water buffalo, an ox, that passes through a window. The head, the horns, and the four legs all pass through. Why can't the tail pass through? A couple of notes about koans. Unlike, say, a math question, every student needs to find their own answer in their own way. And the answers are not really about being like outsmarting the koan. Oh, I know. Yes, it's tricky. It's not intellectual. Somehow you become the answer with your whole body and mind, or you don't. And after you resolve the question, the tradition is that you write a poem to signify your understanding. So this particular Zen koan curriculum was gathered up in the 12th century in China by a gentleman whose name is Wu Hukai. So he worked very hard on the story that I just told you. And after many years of practice, he resolved it for himself, and then he wrote this commentary on the poem. So here's what he came out with. And as I read these words, I hope that you might understand that all I'm talking about is my practice, or the way that I'm trying to make films. Here's what he wrote in the 12th century. If it passes through the tail, if it passes through, it will fall into a ditch. If it turns back, it will be destroyed. This tiny little tail, what a strange and marvelous thing it is. I'm interested in that part of the movies that are often called fringe, or experimental, or explore, or avant-garde. Watching these sometimes very difficult movies is another way for me of asking this question. Why can't the tail pass through? For me, the project of fringe movies has to do with attention. How do we pay attention? All those movies, all those hopes and dreams, those inventions, the strategies, the different ways of constructing pictures, the wonders, I think it can all be summarized in a single word, attention. In a normal movie, in a usual movie, if you notice that you're watching something, the movie's failed because you've just got off the roller coaster. But in the fringe movies, are a kind of demonstration of attention. This is the way that someone is paying attention to this face, or a tree, or a building. In the fringe movies, you're often supposed to notice that you're on a roller coaster. How do we pay attention? These movies are asking us, how do we notice something? How do we notice each other? Okay. I'm going to skip the operation test lab. Good? Yeah. Okay, when should we pick it up again? I was trying to make this movie about Palestine. And in order to do so, I had to take a long detour. And this detour led me to my friend Mike. Many things happened. I'm just going to talk about this one sort of moment of encounter instead. Mike, I sat down with Mike. He talked to me about many things. He's very conversant in Lacan and the Bible, quote at length in a literary theory sort of way, as opposed to a this is what you should believe. And while I'm watching him in the edit room hour after hour, I'm starting to notice certain things about his face. That he had so many faces in his face. So Mike was telling me a story about his father. When he was 8 or 9 years old, his father had a heart attack and nearly died. And the doctors took him aside and said that this is his memory of the event. Did it really happen? The doctor takes him aside and said, if you ever cause trouble for your father, he could have another heart attack and die. Wow, it's a heavy thing to tell a child. But when Mike tells this story, the words are a description of what happened. They point to the fact, they point to the past. But his face is a documentary. The words are fiction, but the face is a documentary. Because his face is showing me what he looked like at that moment when he was 7 years old, when the doctors come. The words are a trigger, they become a kind of trap door, and Mike steps into that door, and voila, he is once again out of the door. But only for an instant, in fact, for even less than a second. One of the great pleasures and great difficulties of making movies at this moment is that you always work with an archive. Everyone knows about this today because our computers have turned, and our smartphones have turned all of us into archivists. All of my favorite songs, my emails and texts, my pictures, they're all archived on my computer. They're all dated and labeled. This sort of mania or anxiety about organization signals to me, perhaps, that this culture is a culture that's deeply afraid of losing something. Otherwise, we wouldn't have recreated or recast an entire culture around these obsessive ordering machines. As a movie maker, I have footage. I have a certain amount of footage, and this is an archive. I pull moments from this archive and I set them into relationship with each other. Always I'm looking to see how they might further this project of attention. How can this archive help me and help the viewers of this movie pay attention or notice the workings of attention? So I'm watching Mike tell a story about his father, and I'm watching very closely all the movements of the landscape of his face. I'm reviewing this small archive of his face, and then I notice something. Okay? When he moves his face, and I plunge into his face. I watch it one frame at a time. There's 30 frames in a second, 30 faces in 1 second of a face. And then I enter into a subterranean world, an underground world, that is in plain sight, but no one can see. His face basically becomes everything that he talks about. It becomes the past. The face is a kind of time travel. There are so many versions of Mike he's holding inside that single face. And when I'm playing when I lose the sync sound, and I'm just looking, I'm not distracted anymore by the language that's coming out, then I can see the truth of what's actually happening between us at this moment. And by creating a series of freeze frames, I'm able to share this moment-by-moment shift. These freeze frames, as they appear, they might look stylized. The pictures no longer flow in real time. Instead, they're interrupted. They appear maybe epileptic, frozen, moving, frozen, moving, moving, frozen, moving. This face as he talked about it. But I think there is a truth in that rhythm. And that rhythm of stopping and starting, of showing these secret faces, I think has something to do with Mike's truth as we are sitting here together with each other. Maybe if everyone knew him the way his friends knew him, know him deeply, this mechanical editing prosthesis, this extravagant editing wouldn't be required. Because when you're deeply paying attention to someone, particularly if you can practice the art of not knowing, then you can be tuned into the most important part of what happens between two people. And that is the art of the invisible. I think this is what we're practicing together with each other all the time. The art of the invisible. The most perfect movies for me are only about this invisible world. In other words, the tail of the ox. Why can't the tail pass through? By showing these moments of Mike's face long ago, the face that he never left behind, the face that's secretly living, still living inside his face, I'm hoping to share moments of this invisible past that keeps wanting to show itself over and over again, rising to the surface and then falling back, before it's swallowed up again in this restless flow of the present, where you're busy forgetting everything, leaving everything behind. One day, my friend Warren said to me, the greatest gift you can give me is the gift of your attention. Warren is such a smart person, and there's a particular way that smart people create problems for themselves. Have you ever noticed that? And one of the things, I could never suggest anything that Warren might do to help. She'd already thought of every possible solution. So the best thing is just for me to listen. Just to listen to what she has to say, that's all. With no judgment. Just to grant her this gift of attention. Can you imagine lying down sick when you're old, or you're not so old, and close to death? At this moment, your house, your things, your achievements, all the things in your life, they just melt away. They don't mean so much, perhaps, at this moment. I think what might be important when you can taste the end of everything, when you can feel down at the end of the exhale, is this quality of attention. It leaves a kind of residue. It leaves a taste in the mouth, the encounters that you have with others. I think at the end, there's only relationships. I think that we live in a culture that keeps celebrating people who are a little bit unwell. And there are people you sort of put up a little bit. And there are often people who are lacking something. There's a hole that they need to fill. And they're going to fill that hole by getting attention. Pay attention to me. We've all met people like this. They're the person at the dinner party who never stops talking. And they can only talk about themselves. When I wait in line at the grocery store, I don't know if you have lines. I see these shiny magazines with movie stars on the cover. And all those people, they're so busy needing so much attention. They're the ones who are always talking. But I think the real heroes of this culture are the ones who know how to listen. This is what I would love to see on the covers of those shiny magazines. A picture of someone who's just listening, who's just receiving something, someone's face, for instance. A picture of someone who's able to drop deeply into this place of not knowing, so they can bear witness to the world as it is. Not to the world as they would prefer it to be. Oh, why is this movie so long? Why is it so orange? Why is this seat so hard? Not to bear witness, not to a version of the world that you might prefer, but to things as they actually are, just as they actually are right now. To give your attention to this moment, which is the only moment when we can do the work of cinema. The only moment when cinema might appear. And it does so, I think, whenever we're able to see clearly without all of our precious, important ideas. When we might be able to drop our ideas and appear naked in this moment together. And to take the terrible risk of seeing something you can't understand. Of seeing something you can't explain, that you can't put into words, that you can't answer. Because as soon as you have the answer, you throw it away. There's no need to think about that anymore. So, how could you possibly answer, how could you possibly explain, for instance, the person, the face of the person that you've fallen in love with? I wanted to share with you some words by the great Italian poet and filmmaker, Paolo Pasolini. He wrote this very short poem. Here's the first line. I force myself to understand everything. It makes me think, what is it? What do I need to understand? Oh, yes, everything. It's a tall order. I force myself to understand everything. Ignorant as I am of any life that isn't mine. I think he's telling me, I'm ignorant of any life. It's hard for me to understand a life that isn't my life. In other words, I'm stuck in my old patterns of seeing and thinking. This is what he calls my nostalgia. Desperate in my nostalgia, he writes, because he can feel the bars of his cage. He can feel his restrictions, maybe. The restrictions of the old, reliable, familiar ways. The old, comfortable ways that he's used to describe his world. I wonder if you're ever able to feel your restrictions. I think this is the invitation of the poem. Can you feel the places in your body that are tight, gripped, holding on, places in the life of your body or in the life of the city that you can't feel? Pasolini says, I need to understand everything. This is how we're going to begin. How should we start? This is the first line, the first step. And how do I reach this understanding of everything? I think it might have something to do with not accumulating more facts, but just letting go of everything I might know. I let go of my ideas, of my usual patterns, my habit patterns, I get lighter, and then he continues the poem, and then he writes about what happens when he looks, and Pasolini is looking from this new place of not knowing. He writes, I realize the full experience of another life. I'm all compassion. But I wish the road of my love for this reality would be different. That I then would love individuals one by one. All of a sudden, I'm here, and you're here. And with a camera, with a necessary third element, we have this thesis, antithesis, synthesis, as David likes to say, and then we have cinema. Cinema somehow is always a threesome thing. Let me say this again. Alice said, it's like a water buffalo, an ox, that passes through a window. The head, the horns, the four legs all pass through. Why can't the tail pass through? This story was written in China, and an ox or a water buffalo, a very common sight in China or India. It's like a bicycle, or a pickup truck, or a garbage truck. Without a water buffalo, you can't get water. You can't get around. Perhaps the water buffalo stands for the utility of the mind. It's always nearby, always ready to help you out if this animal is asked in the right way. The water buffalo, like your mind, can be trained in certain ways. Though at some fundamental level, it's unknowable, a mystery. Sometimes I look at the person who's sleeping beside me and I wonder, what do I really know about you? In the story, the water buffalo is coming through a window. The large parts make it through, the body and the legs, but some small part can't make it through the window. That small part might be called awakening, or waking up to the thing that you spent your entire life trying to put in, shove aside. Or let's deal with that a little bit later. That you built your entire life trying to avoid. The tail, for me, is the one thing that I haven't been able to work with. It's that little bit of anxiety, it's the addiction that I can't quite turn off. It's the ideal, that beautiful, perfect ideal that I can't live inside my body. Perhaps, I was wondering, as I came in today, perhaps this door over here that we all came through is like a window in our story. And perhaps we're like that water buffalo. Is there anything that you've left behind when you walk in here today? One of the newly common features of public life is to do these very focused exercises with our thumbs. I don't know when it was decided exactly, but the thumb is the most important part of the body now. And as a result, people bring machines with them to do thumb exercises like this, or like this, or like this. And these exercises are somehow a way of not quite being all here, like not quite coming all the way through the door. I'm here, but I'm also a little bit over there, and over there, and over that part of the city too. And it's the smartphone, it suggests to me something about fear. Why is it so hard to be here? I don't know about you, but for me, it's because I'm afraid. I'm afraid to tell you the truth, or to show you who I really am, whatever that is, my unguarded face. I have my first line of defense, my telephone, and that makes things a little bit easier, softer. This tail, maybe the tail of the water buffalo is also our young life, the life that we used to have, that is hunting us. You see this a lot with old music bands who are forced to play their old hit songs, the songs they wrote when they were 18 or 19 years old. And even though they've written 10 songs, 100, 1,000 songs since then, we only want to hear the old songs. Our favorites, the hits. These bands are hunted by the people they used to be, their young, perfect selves. They live in the shadow of the person they used to be. Psychologists tell us that our adult life has been sculpted or shaped by our childhood. Freud said that our greatest fear was the fear of dying. And so this is the fear that we repress, we put away. This guy named Adler, who split from Freud, he said that what we repress most is power. Jung, who also split with Freud, said that the quality we most repress is a desire to connect with something bigger than oneself. Is that why you come to the cinema? Is that why I come to the cinema? Because I've grown tired of the old gods and I want to reinvent them here, to connect with something larger than myself. Ernest Jones, another psychologist, said that the thing we most repress is the fear that we won't have desire, that we won't allow ourselves to want what we want. Our greatest fear is to love our desire. Would it be too dangerous, too awful, if you got what you really want it? Perhaps each of these psychologists, with their fear of death, the fear of connecting something larger, the fear of what we want, perhaps they're all projecting the results of some deep inner searching that's in particular to each of them alone. You think you've got through the window, you think you've walked through the door, and then someone shows up, oh, things start going wrong somehow. There's some new challenge, and then I think to myself, something's been left behind. What happens to the difficult feelings like hatred, for instance, if I can't bring it through the door? Maybe I turn it against myself. The tail, the part of yourself that you can't see, comes back in some other form, as self-punishment perhaps, or something that I'm just not able to see, a blind spot that exists right in the middle of the field of vision. The Dalai Lama, everyone knows. People know who that is? Dalai Lama.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Right. He's another famous guy. He's not so often out with those shiny magazines, but sometimes. He first visited the United States in the 1980s. So at the end of his teaching period, the young psychologist Jack Kornfield asked him this question. Is there anything that you notice that's unique in the United States that only happens here? So the Dalai Lama gets together his translator. So if you ever see the picture of the Dalai Lama, it's like, he says, self-judgment. I've never encountered this before. An astonishing thing to say. Or that's maybe we don't have that in Spain. How can a society that loves the self, that celebrates the self everywhere, hate the self so much? The second most popular hashtag on Twitter is me. The first is love. The tail, the small part of you that can't get through the door, the tail that holds you back. It might be self-judgment. Here's another reason why I'm not good enough. Okay, just a little bit left. We're in the midst of the largest, there's nothing up there, because everything's up there, we're in the midst of the largest liberation movement in history, which is the liberation of every constraint of the very richest people on earth from making money. We've created this tremendous inequality because everything can be turned into money. Water, for instance, can be turned into money. The earth is open and fracked, forests are leveled. We're witnessing a class war of unprecedented dimensions. The rich have repackaged the liberation movements of women and blacks and animals in order to free their greed and the flow of capital. We can have free trade, but not free people. We're creating a permanent underclass. I don't need to tell anyone to understand. This feels to me one of the most urgent questions of cinema today, particularly what we call the experimental fringe cinema, or what I like to call the cinema of attention. How can we use the quality of attention in the service of some kind of resistance, or even paying attention to the unnoticed places, the unnoticed stories, the unnoticed people in our midst? How can we open to see each other? How can we share our pictures without turning us into logos and brands, something else that can be bought and sold? How can we practice until we're not afraid of ourselves any longer? To look at the tail and see our unlived lives and not be afraid. So I just wanted to show this little clip, and then we'll see. And the lights good again? Somewhere? If someone could turn the lights on, that would be great. That's the end of the prepared session. If someone would like to offer an anecdote or an amusing aside or a question or a reaction shot, that would be wonderful. But we could just all sit here in silence for a while too.
I'll break it down so that it's it's a formal question. To this week, the importance of music for you versus yesterday, how the music was kind of another story inside of the thinking that you had. Like, so the question is the importance of music for you, how you think the music after before doing the feel.
So in this clip, I'm making a movie. I've been trying to go back to the very beginnings of cinema, to the brothers Lumiere, and I'm just trying to make really 1-minute shots, everything with a tripod, master shot, wide shots, and just seeing what's happening around. So there's many things that I love about this, the people in this shot. The way that they live, they're living in their bodies. Even in particularly the woman who's right in the middle of the shot, who has had some of her body taken away, or at least radically reduced. So the music that we're hearing, of course, isn't the music that they were hearing. Of course, whenever anyone is playing music, I think there's another sort of music that's playing, in our bodies and our minds. The music is by Scott Tuma, a guitarist who usually works alone. He's a little bit obscure. I love his work so much, and what I couldn't help but notice is this tremendous exuberance and life-affirming, this cherishing, this great opening, and at the same time, this incredible loneliness. You know, everyone's dancing, but a little bit like, I'm just dancing by myself over here. And I'm dancing by myself. And everyone has their own style, which is great, but also like, oh, so like, some of the beauty of, in fact, what they're expressing is like, oh, they're actually able to come out in public and say, I'm so lonely. This is what my body looks like when I'm showing you how lonely I am. And somehow the music tells that story. Because Scott is one of those people, or he knows that place, you know, he's also sitting in that wheelchair somewhere. So it's like, it comes together. The only important parts are no one talks. It's the most significant.
Mi pregunta es, ¿qué comparte la persona del vídeo que estaba grabando con el teléfono móvil y qué similitudes hay entre las motivaciones que tiene para grabarlas y las que tú tienes para grabarlas a ellos? ¿Qué te motiva a hacer esto?
Sorry, I missed the first bit of your question, but I think part of what you're implying is that we're in a constant state of recording, and that so we can speak, and even at this moment, there's various recordings happening. So somehow our postmodern condition has to do with this archaeology of recordings, but we're always in the middle of it. And I think you're asking about the relationship between different sort of layers of these recordings. Would you say something? Yeah? Oh, okay. So part of what I'm trying to do in this project is to reconvene public space. So I'm not going to people's homes or bedrooms or kitchens. I want only to be outside in the public square. And this city, I can't help but notice, is incredibly free of surveillance cameras. Unlike the city that I live in, which now has this mania for public surveillance. And these cameras are, being used in ways that we know very well. So I'm trying to show pictures of a different kind of public life, and perhaps offering images of people who may not often be on the screen, let's say. Though at the same time, as the project is taking shape at this moment, with this archaeology of recording, everyone that you see there is already a picture. Before they step into the frame, everyone is already a picture, already, you could say, camera ready. In other words, we're engaged in this gesture of striking a pose, as Madonna would say. How are we going to strike a pose? How should I sit as an audience member? How should I sit up here? How should I ask a question or answer? What part should I play now? A little bit like this.
I couldn't help notice some people looking as though living in the present in that moment when someone's driving in the past on the future at the back of the phone. And that led me to a fascinating question whether one's going to film, whether it's in this view, a way of being in the present somehow live in some sort of happy state.
Sorry, say the last part again. Lifting the happiness?
As in, you go out, to record, and I was asking myself, at that moment, you recorded, there's a way of actually being present with yourself and listen to all the voices, it's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how obvious it was to you, but the woman in the wheelchair notices right away that there's a camera there. And she starts, she does this, it's like, how do you like this? What about this? Is this good? Like she's she's offering versions of herself, and she's talking to me, right? Like all of a sudden the camera is connecting us through this wire. And so I'm it's the middle of the afternoon, I'm standing right there. It's like she's closer to me than we are apart right now. Like she's right over there. So in a way, we're doing this dance together. That's how I felt as the shot was rolling. Of course, at a certain moment, she sort of loses it. There's a lot of things going on around her, and then it's this woman dancing across, and so she gets involved in other things. But absolutely, it's a way of plunging into this present moment, and not having some predetermined idea of, oh, a woman in a wheelchair, how sad and awful that is, or a woman in a wheelchair, oh, it's tragic that she can't dance. No, she is dancing. Like she's just like everyone else. She's also doing her dance. No less, no more. I would say.
You were saying that you were interested in cinema's kind of revolutionary thing, and you kind of like to make visible the unseen, especially for the computer often. Do you feel a kind of responsibility towards this situation, or just your natural energy?
Responsibility. Yes. Yeah, I really do. So much of the process of making movies has become so accessible. The old dream of the 60s, which is that everyone would be an artist, and that everyone, not just an artist, but also everyone would be their own dissemination system. So everyone would be their own television station. This dream has, it's not fully realized, of course, but it's actually on the way. It's coming, it's happening. But as this new accessibility arrives, I feel like that what comes with it is some new kinds of questions around what are we doing with our pictures? What are they for, let's say? And is it possible to talk about what are they for without converting ourselves into some kind of economic ledger? Oh, if 400 people didn't see your film, you're a failure. Or, maybe it would be possible to make a movie that one person saw and it changed their life forever, and they became, the person who would lead the new party, or would be able to resolve this question of, or stop plaguing themselves with this question of, why can't I have the life I used to have when I used to have legs? Wouldn't that be a huge act if you could let that go? If you could just release that, and what kind of picture could you make? could you share with someone so that they would be able to really surrender their past and just be all here, like, but there's all these things happening right now. I don't have to worry about that. You know, that terrible, the car accident that cost me the use of my life. I think there's moments large and small in this struggle. And I think there's some pictures are very big and need to be seen by many people. But there's also small ways to work with pictures. I think I'm more concerned with small pictures, small festivals, small audiences, micro cinemas of various kinds, and how we might articulate a kind of, what's the losing guitar saying, the minor literatures, the minor resistances of our time. It's after 6.
Yeah. Por las palabras, por los comentarios en relación a que yo quiero preguntarte a la política de las máquinas, sobre esas imágenes, esa poesía de la imagen, que aparte de como un movimiento político, ¿no? Donde mucho que se crea, ¿no? Y se encuadra y se representa en esa realidad. Entonces, me parece muy interesante, ¿no? Que comentarnos la existencia y entonces, esa existencia debe, ¿no? De un partido político sobre la realidad.
Okay. Maybe I could say a few words about the movie that was shown last night about my friend Tom Shalom. He's a very, he lived a very marginal life. He's extremely poor. And then he was tremendously sick for the last 2 decades of his life. He lived really the last 50 years of his life more or less locked up inside his apartment. So part of the hope of making that movie was to bring him back into the world. The reason why Tom lived as long as he did was because he had the curious fortune of becoming HIV positive in New York City, a city which a tremendous amount of AIDS on the ground, AIDS activism happened to create a kind of alternative healthcare system only for people that are HIV positive. If he was just left up to his Parkinson's, which killed him in the end, he would have received none of that health care. So I see the movie as part of that whole gesture of gay liberation and the normalization of folks that were HIV positive. And I see the gay liberation movement in turn as part of a chain series of movements. The women's liberation movement, Black liberation, animal liberation. I see all these movements as a chain series of movements that ebb and flow. That have their very high points, and then sometimes they seem as if they disappear entirely, but then they arise again in some incredibly new form. And so when Occupy came to Toronto, for instance, there was a lot of discussion around how people touched each other. I don't know. This is a touchy culture, so I'm sure you have no hang-ups around that. But for the people that were, I wasn't one of the people that were encamped, but I went very often. And there was this whole, many of the women who were staying there really felt like, I need more space. Like, I don't want all these people touching me all the time. And there were spaces created within the park that we occupied that were like queer-friendly spaces, particularly queer-friendly spaces. And so I feel like my movie is like, it's like a note on the piano. It's a long, it's a long tune, and it's good to feel part of that tune. Is it good? Thanks so much for coming and listening to these inscrutable words, whatever they might have meant. You've really been so kind over and over again. It's really been so fun being here.
Gracias a todos. Esta vez la programación continúa. Gabriel Hernández, Gabriel Hernández es el mismo teatro principal. Tenemos también una sesión de flora en la zona C. Así que de acuerdo, podemos hacer a Mike Hoolboom, los profesionales, económicamente como que tratamos la.
Stop.